We were sitting together at the party, several of us who were members of the same church family. It had been a rough year. Our pastor had resigned under pressure from some, and others had lined up in support of him, and still others were just shocked and struggling to understand how it all happened. But it was summertime, and it seemed like the entire congregation was taking a breather and wondering what was to come. So some of us were relaxing together at a backyard barbecue. Night was falling, but no one seemed anxious to leave. That's when the storytelling started, prompted by a question of one of our newer members. So, what is it that attracted you to our church? She started telling us. When we first moved into our neighborhood where we live now, we noticed something about some of the children that mine had become friends with. Like what? Oh, just little things. The way they treated one another, for example, with respect, with compassion. Even the way they treated our pets with delight and affection. There was a peace they had with one another and with themselves, and signs of what I wanted for my children. And to be honest, what I wanted for myself. I learned that all those children were part of some church family, and if these little things were signs of what they were getting in church, and I wanted that for my children, what I wanted for myself. So, my family and I started looking for a church family to belong to. So you might say our children and their little friends led us here. Now I guess you could say we're just part of the crowd, and we love it. Those children led her husband, and her family into a crowd. Like the crowds that move through the stories in the Bible. There's a crowd in this story that's looking for Jesus, and the story tells us that the crowd is hungry. They don't simply have hungry bellies. They have hungry hearts. They're not especially a religious bunch. It's nearly time for the Passover feast, but they are nowhere near Jerusalem. What are they doing out here looking for Jesus? If they'd gone to the Passover feast in Jerusalem, they would have heard once again that God was with their ancestors in the past. What they're hungry for now is knowledge is with them now. It's the same kind of hunger that we have in our hearts, isn't it? Like them, we don't come into this community to hear, once upon a time, God. We don't come simply to discuss for living the good life or discussing doctrines about the nature of God. We want to know that God's voice isn't an echo fading away in some distant past. We come hoping that God's presence isn't just some kind of wishful thinking. We come looking for some sign that at the other end of our longing, there is God. The crowd in this story is looking for a sign like that. They've been told that there were some big signs in Jesus' ministry, and as they gathered, you should have heard what they were saying. Some of the stories they might have swapped show up right here in John's Gospel. Did you hear about that wedding over in Cana? Oh, that's nothing. I heard about a guy from, all the way over in Capernaum. I can't think of his name. An official in Herod's court asked for the healing of his son. Well, what about that man that sat by that pool? Where was that? Oh, Bethsaida, yeah. Guy sat there for 38 years. Jesus comes along, boom. Up he gets and walks. Could it be, they wondered, that what some were saying was true? That God had come to live among them? Jesus had performed some miraculous healings. It got their hopes up. It's as if the message was written on the sky. God is here. There is that much love set loose in the world. It's the kind of love that will flow into the household of the royal official to touch a sick child or reach the man who for 38 years was kept out of the flow of God's love because no one was there to help. It's even the kind of love that will show up in an anxious relationship and enliven celebration. Something like that might just cause folks to dust off their Bibles and read what Moses had promised. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. God says, I will put my words in the mouth of that prophet who shall speak to them everything that I command. And what does this Jesus command them to do? To sit down together, regardless of what country they are from, what their religious practices were, what our skin color is. And before we know it, we find that we have received so much grace at the hands of God that we are able to share it with someone else. That's the sign that John wants us to see. That there is that much love in the world, and it flows from the stories of Jesus. Do you know where that great flow of love started? In that crowd, there's a little child. His is a small presence. I bet you hardly noticed. The other three gospel writers tell this story, but they don't mention him. In those stories, there is no small child holding on to his lunch. It's a small lunch. Just some bread and fish. But what is that in the face of such tremendous need? So the Gospel of John beckons this boy out from the shadows of this story, and just for a moment he shares the spotlight with Jesus. They must have seen him do it. It was a small gesture, a little thing, barely noticed. But in that moment, all of us see what it means to be a believer. A little boy takes what little that he has, and in the face of such tremendous need, hands it over to Jesus. I wonder what Jesus was thinking when that little boy handed over what he had. Was he thinking of that moment that would soon come in his own story? When he would turn over what little life he had left and place it in the hands of God? Was that the moment when he thought, no one has greater love than this, that one would lay down a life for friends? But what is one life among so many? One life freely laid down so that many might taste the abundant love of God? This is what faith looks like. When one of God's children dares to let go of what little that they have and places it in God's own hands. And then God's love is released to do its work in the world. And it took a little boy hidden off in the margin of a story to show us.